But I will talk without the presentation and you'll follow. It's easier.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so thank you very much, especially to the organizing committee for the invitation and especially for allowing me to do this online, because it was impossible for me to be in Poland today because tomorrow I have to be in the US. So it would be quite an energy waste in terms of going everywhere. It would be emissions, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm in Lisbon, and I thank you for the possibility to do this online. So I'm a law professor at the University of Lisbon, and what I intend to talk about is about the use of nudges or informed regulation that have regressive risks, and for that they cause risks for this just transition. So my presentation is called Behavioral Tools, Just Transition, and the Ethics of Energy Regulation, Navigating Regressive Risks in Decarbonization Policies. And why does this matter? And why do I look at this from a behavioral economics perspective? First of all, we're talking about energy transition. And this is not only a technological problem, but it's also a social and an ethical problem. And actually, behavioral instruments are being increasingly used to steer energy choices. And normally they're used because they're cheap, and normally also because they're quite effective and cost effective. So the problem is that efficiency may unintentionally deepen inequality. So instead of increasing equality, the use of these tools may increase inequality. And since governments are using behavioral science to influence choices in energy markets, we must be sure that the use of these tools are not causing distributional effects that may be regressive. So if I want to make justice, and if I want to have ethics and this transition in terms of energy policy, I have to look at these topics. So the central problem is that behavioral tools are shaping decarbonization. But the question is, are they compatible with a just transition? There's tensions between effectiveness and fairness, autonomy and paternalism, efficiency and legitimacy. And what this presentation explores is how behavioral energy regulation can avoid regressive risks and respect both autonomy, transparency, legitimacy, and equity. And the theoretical foundations for this presentation rely on behavioral economics. So the idea of a bounded rationality, a bounded motivation, and bounded self-interest. Also regulatory theory, which puts in perspective the questions surrounding legitimacy and accountability, also ethics and justice, especially in the perspective of fairness and protection of vulnerable groups. So these three perspectives together allow us to critically assess not only how behavioral tools work, but whether they are normatively acceptable in energy governance. And behavioral informed instruments, normally the most known ones are nudges, like green defaults, like feedback, like the use of social norms, of commitment devices. We can also use behavioral insights to redesign taxes, for instance, carbon taxes with framing effects. So these mechanisms, what they want to do is to shift behavior subtly, but sometimes they're, not sometimes, always, their distributive consequences are rarely analyzed. So sometimes these smart policies become regressive. And we will have regressive nudging with higher costs for low-income users, with cognitive asymmetry where wealthier users navigate better, which causes moral hazard, which means that with these behavioral tools, we are shifting responsibility from the government to individuals, and efficiency gains may come with a cost of justice, especially when behavioral asymmetries mirror socioeconomic inequalities. And the main problem is to know if there are some groups that are more susceptible to nudges, if nudges affect vulnerable populations more, and if there are some cognitive or social profiles that are more nudgeable. And for this, we need to check and cross-check nudgeability and distributional effects, not overall welfare effects, distributional effects. The fact is we have little data on this. So it's an area where research should deepen the mining of data. So despite the belief that nudges are costless, they actually may entail significant costs. And who is more likely to be nudged and behaviorally more vulnerable? There are already some studies that show that the level of education or literacy, legal, digital, financial, can influence people. The cognitive and emotional pressure, like economic stress, cognitive overload, can also have an impact. The perceived structures, especially greater trust or dependence on state institutions and the perception of fairness, can also help people being more vulnerable to behavioral tools. And also there's some data about socio-demographic differences like age, where youth and elderly normally are more susceptible to nudges, gender, generally women, also the income level, and also minorities. So there's an amount of data that shows that in some situations, some people are more vulnerable or more susceptible to nudges than others. And this is what I wanted to do, is to link this with just transition. And the just transition movement is, as an origin, the labor movement, but now it relies on climate policy. And the principle behind it is no one should be left behind in this low carbon shift. So there's dimensions of distributive, procedural, and recognition justice. And the idea of this just transition actually reframes decarbonization as a moral and institutional project. So it demands that efficiency and fairness should be co-designed and not traded off. And as examples for nudges that actually could be regressive and have distributional effects, there are three interesting studies, one by Ebeling and Berger about the opt-out for renewable energy in Germany, where when we have opt-out decisions, the green default rule is chosen by 90% of consumers, while when we have opt-in systems, 25% of people will choose the green opt-out. Also, in Switzerland, there's a study by Gessler and others where the authors find that the default is successful at curbing greenhouse gas emission, but it leads poorer households to pay more for their electricity consumption than they want to, while leaving a significant willingness to pay for green electricity by richer households untapped. Also, there's a very interesting case by Klant et al. That analyzed Germany's refrigerator replacement program and taking nudges that were already tested with success in some categories of people. What they realized was when they apply this to lower income families, the nudges backfired. So there was a transportability problem in taking nudges that were effective in a context and passed it to another context and to vulnerable groups. So what this means is that behavioral policies need equity audits. Nudges should be context sensitive and should attend to heterogeneity. Also, justice frameworks should guide ethical calibration, and instead of rejecting these behavioral tools because they can be regressive, we should design them ethically with justice concerns embed. So this is what we should do, is a need for ethical sensitivity and differentiated regulation by looking at aspects such as assessment of distributive impact of nudges prior and during the implementation of nudges, transparency in the design and application of nudges, right to contest and genuine opt-out for energy consumers, the design of socially sensitive nudges, and have a for good policy all over the energy policy. This means that we should attend to principles such as transparency. So we should disclose the mechanisms and intent behind nudges, use proportionality, legitimacy and accountability, and what we aim to is to ensure that public accepts these tools and that these tools are oversighted. Also, these principles, transparency, proportionality, legitimacy, and accountability, should ensure that behavioral regulation operates within democratic, transparent, and fair boundaries. So we should go from smart to just regulation and to a constitutional approach of these nudges regulation. So we should add distributive metrics to policy evaluation, combine behavioral insights with social protection, redefine efficiency as inclusive efficiency, promote procedural rights and co-design with citizens, and policymakers should balance behavioral innovation with ethical reflections. And justice must be embedded and not just added in the way we build energy regulation and these behavioral tools. So this constitutional approach means that we should have active transparency, an open data state. We should look at co-design and active listening, procedural rights, and transformative empowerment, taking into account democratic innovations, effective accountability, and of course, distributional, procedural, and transformative justice. So the key takeaways are that behavioral tools are powerful, but they are not neutral. Without safeguards, green policies can be regressive and create legal and ethical concerns. So a just transition aligns behavioral design with fairness, and a just transition is both a technical and a moral challenge, one that requires interdisciplinary collaboration between law, economics, and ethics. So in conclusion, a legitimate fiscal